The time is just gone 8:38 a.m. and we're taking a look at National World's Week, which is an initiative of the Law Society of South Africa from the 26th to the 30th of October 2020, which has been declared National World's Week 2020, where the public is given free advice and assisted in drawing a simple will. Now, Al-Baraka Bank and the Association of Muslim Accountants and Lawyers, Amal, have partnered this year to give free advice to the public. And we have with us this morning Maulana Safwan Navlaki, who is a Sharia advisor at Al-Baraka Bank, who will give us some insight on this very important topic of the importance of securing an Islamic world. Now, before we even bring on Maulana Safwan Navlaki, I would like to inform listeners that Al-Baraka Bank and Amal are having a webinar with the keynote speaker being attorney M.S. Umar on Saturday, the 24th of October from 2 p.m. to 4 p.m. You can register for this webinar by using either the Amal or the Al-Baraka websites or their social media pages. Maulana, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh and welcome.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Jazakumullah khairan for the opportunity.
Jazakallah Maulana for joining us this morning. Now, let's just start off and understanding the importance of a will and why is it so important for a Muslim to have a will?
Absolutely. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. In order to understand the importance of having a will, we need to understand the importance of ensuring Islamic inheritance, the laws of Islamic inheritance. If we look at the Holy Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in detail outlines how one's assets and one's estate is to be distributed after their demise. And this is in Surah An-Nisa, which is in the 4th juz of the Holy Quran. After Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala outlines in detail how our wealth should be distributed, He mentions at the end that these are the limits set by Allah, and whoever abides by these limits, then they will be rewarded by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with Jannah. And as for that person who fails to adhere to these limits, they transgress these limits, and this is in direct reference to the laws of inheritance, then this person will be subject to the punishment in the fire. So we understand from here that not fulfilling this requirement of ensuring that our wealth is distributed in accordance with Islamic law is very crucial in terms of how we fare as Muslims in the Akhirah. The second point is the importance of a will in itself. Rasulullah mentions in a hadith reported by Abdullah ibn Umar radiallahu anhu that it is the duty of every Muslim who has anything to bequeath not to let 2 nights pass except that he has this bequest written and kept with him. So in our context, that bequest would reflect in an Islamic will. Now, just to bring this whole concept into our context in South Africa, if a person has to die without a will, what happens in that case is that his estate is distributed in accordance with an act called the Interstate Succession Act. And this act is part of the laws of South Africa, but the distribution will not happen in accordance with Sharia. And therefore, there is a principle in Islamic law which states that anything that is required to fulfill a compulsory act becomes compulsory in itself. For example, wudu is not compulsory, right? We don't have to make wudu and stay in the state of wudu all the time, although it is encouraged and very virtuous, but it is not something that is compulsory. But if a person is now to perform salah, he cannot perform salah without wudu, so therefore it will be compulsory for him to perform wudu at this particular stage. Similarly, we understand that the Islamic laws of inheritance are compulsory and fard for us to adhere to. If we do not prepare a will, our estate is not going to be distributed in accordance with Islamic law, and therefore it automatically becomes fard and compulsory for us to prepare an Islamic will and ensure that we have this in place prior to our demise.
Maulana, now will a person who fails to prepare an Islamic will he be considered sinful or negligent?
Yes, indeed. If just as a person who leaves out any other compulsory act and fails to put in the necessary measures to ensure that the laws of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are enforced, so too will a person who fails to prepare an Islamic will be held accountable.
Now, Maulana, sometimes people intentionally design their worlds in a way that prejudices one or more rightful heirs. What is the Islamic ruling on this?
Yes, this is a very important point to discuss. Here we find that people have various circumstances. They may have a son or a daughter who got married to someone that they are not happy with, or a son or daughter who moved overseas and really didn't keep that much of contact with their parents, and various other reasons which may result in the parent or the child or whoever it is, the relative, being unhappy with another person who is the Islamic heir. And this leads them to try to prejudice that particular heir in terms of their will by inserting a clause that this person should not inherit, or this person should only inherit so much and not what they are entitled to, and so on and so forth. So here there are 2 points I'd like to mention. The first is the Islamic concept of ownership. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has placed our wealth in our control, and we have a mandate over this wealth, but this mandate is limited. As soon as a person enters into his terminal illness and he dies, then that mandate, that ownership over the wealth that we own, comes to an end, and it automatically passes to our heirs. Now, when a person inserts a clause in his will to state that to specify how his estate should be distributed, he is actually interfering in what does not belong to him any longer, and therefore this is a grave sin. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam mentions in a hadith narrated by Abu Huraira radiallahu anhu that a person, man or woman, spends the entire life. In this hadith, he mentions 60 years. In another hadith, 70 years. The entire life is spent in the obedience of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And come the end of their life, they betray their heirs. They act unjustly in terms of their will. And because of this single act, they will incur the wrath of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and be subject to punishment in the fire. In another hadith, in the other hadith where Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam mentioned 70 years, he goes on to say that a person may have spent their entire life in the disobedience of Allah, but come the end of their life, they realize the rights of their heirs in their estate, and they leave it strictly in accordance with the Islamic laws of inheritance. And by doing this, they will secure the eternal pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and Jannah.
Okay. Now, Maulana, we know, obviously Islam built on the principles of justice. And even when it comes to inheritance, we talk about divine justice behind the Quranic ruling that requires the male heir to receive double the share of his female counterpart. So if you could please just expound on this point of divine justice.
Yes, definitely. Again, another very important point. And it is important because we find there's a lot of misinformation going about nowadays, especially, we see that there's a certain agenda to delegitimize Islam. And this information creeps up, and sometimes due to our lack of knowledge, we find that we get caught up and doubts start creeping up into our minds. So it's important for us to reflect and appreciate the divine justice in the laws of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that is the first point, that we need to submit and give into the fact that there is nothing that can be more just than the laws of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Secondly, if we find ourselves faced with anything that could lead to doubts, then we should refer to the scholars of Islam who can clear these doubts from our mind to ensure that our iman is saved. Now, coming to the actual topic at hand, the Islamic law of inheritance and the divine justice behind it. Right? Apart from the Islamic law of inheritance, we have two other extremes. The one extreme is the absolute freedom of testation, which we find in the modern world, where a person can do as he pleases with his wealth. And here we find that a person is given, he is given absolute discretion, and he can leave his wealth to his cat and his dog and leave his family destitute for whatever reason. And on the other hand, you have the Interstate Succession Act, which gives preference to a select few heirs, and many others get left out from the picture. So bearing that in mind, The Islamic law of inheritance is predetermined, it is divine, and it fairly accounts for everyone from the relatives of the deceased, and it ensures justice. It ensures that there will be no quarrels and fights and squabbles. The family will remain in harmony and united after the demise of the respective deceased person. Just reflecting over a few factors that we see at play in the broader scheme of the Islamic law of inheritance, we find that the first factor at play is that a person will inherit more or less depending on their closeness to the deceased. So the person that is closer will inherit more. The second point is generational position. We find that the relative that is, in the early part of stages of life will inherit more than the person who is older now and reaching the end of their life. Like you'll find the parent will inherit and the grandparent will not inherit, and the son will inherit more than the parent. So we see that preference is given to those in the early stage of the life. The third point that we see at play is financial responsibility. Those that have a greater financial responsibility are given a larger share. And in this case, we see that a male inherits double the share of the female. And we should bear in mind that this is not a blanket rule that a male always inherits double. There are many instances where a male inherits the same as a female. There are other instances where a female inherits more than the male, and also other instances where the female inherits and the male does not inherit at all. So it is not a blanket rule such as a male inherits double that of the female. Now, coming back to the point of financial responsibility, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has placed the financial burden of taking care of the dependents and the vulnerable people of the family squarely on the shoulder of the male. If a female has wealth and she is earning an income and she spends on her family, that is something she is doing gratuitously and she will be rewarded by Allah. But the ultimate responsibility is on the male, and therefore this system of Islamic inheritance has been designed in this manner. If we reflect over the fact that the female is inheriting a significant portion nonetheless, but she has none of the financial responsibility of the male, we will come to understand that the Islamic inheritance is actually in favor of the female. And the same people who object to this Islamic law of inheritance, we come to realize that the modern world and the Western world had only started allowing females to inherit 1,000 years after the advent of Islam.
Gee. Now, Maulana, just looking at National Worlds Week and this initiative and looking at it from Al-Baraka's perspective, what services will Al-Baraka be offering as part of this National Worlds Week initiative?
The first is the webinar that is happening this Saturday afternoon, and we encourage all our viewers and listeners to join that webinar. There will be a lot of valuable information that will be shared, which we can implement. This is again a crucial point of our lives in preparing our will. There is free advice being given, so we should all try and register for that webinar via Al-Baraka or Amal's social media pages. The second aspect is the services Al-Baraka is providing in terms of the National Worlds Week initiative. Here, the bank is offering free Islamic wills and also free consultations, legal consultations. This will be done virtually. So in order to book your consult with the bank's legal team, our audience is requested to contact Al-Baraka's customer services number, which is 0860-225-786. That number again, 0860-225-786. They can also contact the Amal offices, which are also offering certain legal services. Their number is 031-207-3381. 031-207-3381. And the receptionist will assist you there.
Well, Maulana, Jazakallah so much for coming on and talking with us this morning ahead of National Worlds Week. And Allah accept, Allah reward your efforts. And please be safe, Maulana. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Maulana Safwan Navlaki joining us this morning, looking ahead at National Worlds Week.